Welcome to the Tell Me More About podcast. It's just a podcast where we're talking about things that kind of hit the cutting room floor from this past weekend's sermon with our very own Whit George. Hey, Whit.
Hey.
How's it going?
I'm good.
Good.
Yeah.
Heather had a great idea for a podcast.
I thought so.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of a cool idea. Yeah, we'll see if it works.
Yeah. So, yeah, she just was like, why don't you talk more about whatever you don't get to talk about on the
she
weekend?
knows that I like... I told her today we were coming back from the tree nursery or whatever, looking at trees, and I was like, I'm looking forward to this. I look forward to any time I know people are going to ask me questions.
Oh.
I like being asked. I like teaching.
Yeah.
So it's fun for me. So
yeah.
I'm looking forward to this. Yeah.
And you're good at it. And there's always you're welcome. And whenever we're in content meeting, it's a lot of fun to talk about all the ideas that are coming in. And then there's ideas that really hit you in the moment that you're like, okay, this is what it's about. This is what I want to talk about.
So we should probably tell people what content meeting is, because they might not know.
We definitely
They probably know
should.
it. They don't know it. They shouldn't know. I don't know why they would know.
Well, we get together every Tuesday.
Right.
And my team that I'm on, the spiritual formation team, and the senior pastors at each of our churches, we all get together and we talk about the weekend sermon.
The one that's coming up.
The one that's
what we're going to be talking
up,
about, and kind of, But it functions kind of like a Bible study, like a 2.5 hour Bible study, getting ready for whatever text we're teaching that weekend. Yeah, it's fun.
So what would you say is your favorite part about that meeting?
Oh man, I mean, it's really, I get so much out of it personally. It's fun to study the Bible for a couple hours. I really talking about what all it means, and I don't know, I find it to be fascinating. So I love that meeting. I find that if I don't get to do that meeting, and occasionally there are weeks where I'm gone on a Tuesday, and if I miss that meeting, I find that I just don't like preaching the weekend as much without having done that. There is something about studying the Bible, and if you've never done it before, studying the Bible in community with other people. It's really profound that way. It's awesome by yourself, and I think you should. But I think there's also something wonderful about getting together with people and saying, hey, this is what I'm seeing, and listening to what they're seeing, and their ideas spark more ideas, or their insights or whatever. It's fun to just spend time doing that. I have a great time doing it.
And we've just started a series on Joseph.
Right.
So what was the thing that kind of interested you about Joseph specifically?
Well, I've been interested in, Joseph is a fascinating story and has done for a while, but probably, I want to say 2020 or 2021. I can't remember which. I happened to read the story of Joseph just on my own in Robert Alter's translation and commentary. So pause. Robert Alter is an Old Testament scholar, probably like the Old Testament scholar from a literary standpoint. So for those listening, you have lots of different kinds of scholars. Literary would be looking at the language, the way the book is written. I highly recommend Robert Alter's material. He understands ancient Near Eastern narrative and how they would write and so forth. But the man is not it's not a faith commentary. He's not trying to tell you, he doesn't believe, I don't know that he believes in any of the scripture. He believes in maybe the wisdom of some of the things that are deposited there, but he's not a believer in any sort of way. But it's fascinating because he's trying to write it like it's written in Hebrew. So it's a different translation. And then there'll be a commentary on certain verses. And I read through the entirety of the Joseph story, and it took me a few days to do it. I did it slowly. I would work through a chapter a day or so. And by the time I got to the end, I remember being in my office weeping because of how powerful the story was. There's so many details. There's so many parallels. I say parallels, there's so many callbacks, things that happened that I didn't realize what was going on. I didn't see all the little nuances of the story. I don't know that even when we teach through this that we're going to be able to touch half of those, because there's so many of them and they're fascinating, that you just realize the symmetry, the beauty of the story, but also the emotion of kind of that moment when he reveals himself to his brothers who have betrayed him and sold him into slavery, and what his heart must be feeling and all of it. And it's like this epic saga of a family. It's kind of like Yellowstone, maybe. Although I'm not like a Yellowstone person. I think I've watched like one episode, but it's interesting. I watched one episode because I'm like, all right, I got to see what all of this is about.
Yeah.
And I got into it. I'm like, watched one episode. I'm like, yeah, this is just a big old family drama. Not for me. I don't want to waste, I don't know, the next however many hours or weeks of my life trying to chew through who, Beth and I don't know I know names. I don't know what Dutton and all of this. I don't know the family. Do you know that? Are
Just
you familiar?
an aside.
Yeah.
Yes, I've watched like 5 episodes and then I was like, it's too much drama for me.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I don't need this in my life.
1883.
I started that one too.
I really liked it. Bored?
Yeah.
Really?
I don't know. I'd rather watch The Searchers or something. I'm a kind of old school Western person.
Okay.
I didn't get into it. I hear a lot of good things. I'm pretty choosy about what shows I'll watch. I'm just like, it's gotta be really, really good. For me to invest time.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
I actually understand that. I cannot tell you how many shows that I've started and then I've like stopped within the first episode. And I'm like, no, not worth it.
I made that mistake. With The Walking Dead. I watched like several seasons and I got into it I kept wanting to see how it was going to end. And then finally I got to the point where like, this isn't going to end.
It's never going to end.
They're just going to keep dragging this out forever and ever and ever. And this is stupid. Why am I wasting my time on this absolutely stupid show? It started interesting and it got dumb really quickly, but I couldn't stop watching. I was
You were sucked in.
I'm like, oh man, anyway, whatever.
You can't give up now.
Forgive me if you don't think that's a wholesome show, but whatever.
I would walk in when my husband was watching it every once in a while and I'd be like, okay, who's dying right now?
Yeah,
or
always.
What's going to happen?
Always.
And then I would leave and then just...
I like the I don't know. This is not what this podcast is supposed to be about, but I like the idea. I like the idea of like trying to survive.
But
that's fun.
Here's the thing. No, we're talking about the power of story, really.
Okay, yeah.
And Genesis is...
Well, way to pull us back on track.
Well, okay.
The family saga.
So we're talking about family saga, but I think the important thing to realize is that Joseph is an epic story, but it's within another epic story which is Genesis. It's the last, I don't know what, starts in 37. So
37 to 50, 13 chapters. And
Yeah. You have that one weird chapter with Judah and
That's right.
Tamar.
So 12.
So, but you have all of Genesis to kind of lead into this Joseph kind of like pinnacle moment.
Right.
And so a couple things about like biblical narrative. You read them over and over and over again to kind of get those details that you were talking about that kind of pulled you in and made you extra interested in them.
Sure.
But in Genesis 12, we see this guy, Abraham.
Right.
And God inserts himself into a story and says, I am going to redeem creation through a family.
Yeah.
And family is messy.
Yeah, for sure. So what's interesting, I think, is helpful to sort of understand, and this is something that I think a lot of Christians don't do very well. I didn't do it very well for the longest time, is we just think, Joseph.
Yeah.
But it's not just Joseph. It's this whole family. And even more than that, it's really the whole story of Genesis. Go back to the beginning, Genesis 1, and you have God in the garden with Adam and Eve. And he's like, have a family, expand, fill the earth. God's wanting to do something. And of course, that gets derailed by sin.
Yeah.
But then he keeps coming back and he tries to kind of work things out with Noah, and some stuff happens there and it gets weird. And then it kind of, makes a bit of a covenant with Noah, but Noah's family seems to be a bit of a mess. And then finally finds this guy, Abraham, and by Genesis chapter 12, and then he's like, I'm going to put a family, I'm going to bring a nation out of you, a family out of you.
Yeah.
It's going to bless everyone. And so you're really kind of seeing like God's intention from, Genesis 1:1 to Genesis 50, the end of it. You're seeing God wanting this people, and that something significant is going to happen through these people. And eventually, like we say, he chooses Abraham. And then you get to watch all of the drama of what happens in Abraham's life with Abraham and Sarah, and then being unable to have a child. And then, go ahead. What are you thinking?
So here's the thing. You see the faithfulness of God, the covenant faithfulness of God, but you also see these family traits begin to emerge. So starting with Abraham, what are a couple of the family traits that you begin to see that are passed down from
that's interesting.
Abraham, Isaac,
Yeah,
Jacob?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I would be, that I'm like adept enough to give them names just yet, but you do see, I can think of the actions. You see Abraham, you see Abraham's basically saying that Sarah is not his wife, but she's his sister. You see twice that happens.
There's like this theme of deception that's starting
deception,
to
that's
kind of
probably,
pop
there
up.
you go.
Yeah.
Okay, you're more intuitive than I am. Deception shows up there. You see, I'm trying to think. You see family drama with Hagar, so being I guess Sarah's handmaiden or whatever that she presents to Abraham to bring a child through, which he does do, but then that creates all of this drama within the family to the point at which eventually Hagar and Ishmael end up being sent out, and that creates division and so forth. And then you have, and then all of that kind of starts to ripple down through from Isaac, which obviously we talked a little bit about this weekend with Jacob deceiving Isaac, family drama there between Jacob and Esau, and then obviously what sort of reverberates down into Jacob's family.
So I was sitting there on Saturday night listening to you talk about Jacob and Joseph and how this isn't just Joseph's story, but it's Jacob's story.
Right.
And it's the story of his family. It's the story of where he came from. And you got into a lot of, subject matter about like the reality of your family. And that's a sensitive topic for a lot of people because everybody has a family. And everybody comes from somewhere, and there's things that I think a lot of us are really proud of, or we can maybe find to be proud of about where we come from. And then there's things that are kind of lurking under the surface that we just rather not talk about at all. And so what about those things that kind of lurk under the surface? Do we need to talk about them? Or should we try to talk about them with our family
I think it's a great question. I would say, I think to not talk about them is to underestimate the impact that they have. To act as though, I think what we're saying is if we don't talk about them, in other words, what we're saying is, well, they're just not that big of a deal. They just don't affect me, which I think you're living in denial if you think that your upbringing and family don't have some significant impact on you. And as I said in each of the sermons, the goal is not to blame your parents for everything. We're not trying to go back into our past and assign trauma to every little slight. I mean, good grief, that's ridiculous. I think can be overdone. This is not about trying to like have therapy sessions, but and not that that's completely wrong, but rather to understand how I'm shaped and maybe the motivations for why I do what I do. I think so many of us live our lives not thinking about exactly why we react the way that we do. I think a lot of, maybe at least in my own life, a lot of what I do just seems normal. It seems automatic. It seems inevitable. But when you stop and you go, why do I like to blame other people when things go wrong? Why is that my first reaction is blame and shame? You did this. Why did you do this? Like, and then that's true. Like that's real for me. Like when things are not right, I just want to find someone to blame for it, and that's always anyone but me. So I'm not the kind of person that feels terrible about myself. I'm not the kind of person that beats myself up at night or any of that. I'm going to beat you up. I'm going to tell you why you were wrong and what you did. Like that goes all the way back to like, I remember in 6th grade, playing basketball, I think over at East Central, which is just a couple miles from here. And I was playing on I was on the B team. I wasn't that great. I really hadn't played much basketball at that point in my life. And I don't even remember what school we were playing. We were getting destroyed. I think we had like 4 points, and I may have had all 4 or something like that. We weren't good. And I remember feeling humiliated, embarrassed, and taking that embarrassment out on this young man that was on one of my teammates. And that probably showed up in me yelling at him. I remember after the game seeing my mom, who came to watch me play. She dropped me off or whatever, or came to the game as you do, and so she was mortified at how I'd behaved. Probably the first time she'd seen it, my guess, because I had not been a part of participated in much in the way of sports probably up to that point that I can remember in that way. And she made me go find that young man and apologize to him, which I did do. But that pattern did not stop. I mean, that pattern stayed with me until well into my 30s. I was, when I was playing basketball, that would be my go-to. If we lost, I felt if my reputation was somehow tarnished, it must be your fault. I'm going to blame you. And I would do that. So when I share some stories, sometimes publicly, about me playing basketball or football, even for that matter, just flag football. I didn't play tackle. I would have been crushed. I would have folded up like a lawn chair. But yeah, that was how that would express itself. I would yell at I mean, I drove, like grown men out of the gym, just grab their stuff and leave because of the things I would say. Because I was pinning it on you. Yeah, I'm not winning. It's your fault. You're terrible. And I would let them know.
Yeah. So these are kind of things that, I don't know. I need to be thoughtful about the way I say this, because the habits that you have, that you've carried through childhood and into adulthood, when you have children, they see some of those things and they learn some of those things.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's trying to figure out, so where does that come from? And I mean, there's probably different, some of it is going to be, some of it is not. When I look back for me, and I'm sort of answering your question, but sort of thinking about my own family, because I would imagine people listening to this are going to wonder about some of that. It's like some of it. Obviously, my parents weren't perfect, but I had great parents. But it's not all about them doing everything wrong, and that's what made me the way that I am or was. But maybe I responded to certain tendencies in maybe a particular era of life where there was a certain expectation on people, and maybe anyway, I'm just trying to sort of process my own like why I would have responded in that way. It's not someone else's fault. It's my fault. I did it, but it also came from somewhere. Like I also it was probably a defense mechanism that I picked up early on in my childhood, of a way of feeling like I'm going to shield myself from criticism, from shame, from whatever it is I must be feeling. And I just kind of carried that all the way through. Yeah. And I never dealt with it. And so, the trick is that if I don't deal with that, I run the risk of passing that same trait on to my own kids by, blaming them for stuff, or blaming Heather for things, which I did do. I have done, and I've had to work at it. I mean, that's something that I've had to deal with in my own life. And
the reality is that the pendulum could swing either way. Someone might pick up that trait, or they might say, "I'm never going to be like that," and then they would overcompensate in the other direction. And
can happen. Interestingly enough, a lot of times the same result often is the case. It's like, try as we might to not be our parents, try as we might to not be where we came from, we end up often doing the same thing. It may look different, it may feel a little different, but it functionally it works the same.
What do you do if you identify one of those things and you realize, man, this is I'm compensating in some kind of way with an unhealthy behavior, and you want to make a change? How would you, where do you start?
Well, I would think that the first place to start is just by acknowledging that, right? And I think starting with owning it and probably sharing it and talking a little bit about it. I think things that are, I think that's always the hesitancy around this is I don't want to talk about it because it's just easier. It can be very painful to deal with. But bringing it into the light in a place where you feel safe to do so, and depending on the level of pain, I don't have some of the deep pain that maybe some folks have with their childhood. I certainly have my moments of things that were uncomfortable or not the greatest, but I don't have like horrible scars or any of that. And I know people that do, and so I say this with a degree of respect towards those folks. But I think finding a space where you can share that, and ultimately, I think within the church, that's a great place to do it. Is talking about a little bit about where we come from. So that might be with a spouse or a small group, a trusted small group, right? It might be with a pastor that you need to sit down. And we do have that. I mean, we have people sitting down with pastors regularly. This is where I come from. This is my history. This is what we've been through, whatever. But just starting to acknowledge and kind of piece those things together and recognizing that, oh, this is my tendency. And then even that may not be enough. In some cases, it's like, I'm going to have to go a little deeper and figure that out. And that could be through specific ministries to the, specific to the situation that you've been through, whether or not that's abuse or addiction or whatever, or it could be sitting down with a counselor. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that could happen. But I think this step one is just to start talking about it, not with everybody, but with people where you feel safe to do that with.
I guess, what would you say to the person who is feels like they take ground and then they just kind of regress? Maybe they want to make a change in their family life or their family culture.
Right.
And so they start reading scripture with their kids, or they start praying every night, and then just slowly but surely it's not happening as much, and they have to restart, and they feel like they're restarting over and over and over again. How do you take ground? So it's one thing to identify it, and it's another thing to actually make progress.
Yeah, that's the tough thing, is learning to change those behaviors and actually becoming someone different. Yeah, I mean, that's a hard thing. It's hard to figure out how to change your habits or the flow or culture of your family. That river, that current can be really strong.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you said was talking about it.
Yeah.
And not talking about it just one time.
But lots of times?
But lots of times.
Yeah, that's probably helpful. I mean, I do think, staying with it is probably, I don't know. I don't know that I have a good answer for that question.
I do have another question for you.
Okay.
How do I fix a situation that I caused that feels like broken beyond repair? That feels like a hard question, so I'm sorry. If you're Judah, if you're Reuben even, and you've slept with your father's maidservant, and then you're thinking, oh, I know how I'm going to get in my father's good graces again. I'm going to save his favorite son. Maybe that's what he was thinking. I don't know. But I don't know. How do you fix that situation that you caused that you feel like is beyond repair?
Well, you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, you're never going to be able to go back and repair everything. I mean, I think you can do what only you can do, which is if you need to apologize, if you need to repent, if you need to get counseling, if you need to adjust a behavior and attitude, stop doing something, and whatever's within your power to do, you better do that. But you can't fix what's beyond your repair, only by definition. It's beyond my repair. Well, then you're not going to fix it. So at that point, all you can really do is trust God. And, I mean, and that's one of the main themes of Joseph is the family gets itself into a situation that they cannot fix on their own. And Joseph doesn't end up being the one to fix it. That would be the wrong lesson to take away from this, is look at how Joseph healed his family. He didn't. God did. God worked something in them and through them. It came through obedience, and Joseph's obedience specifically, but Joseph didn't do it himself. It was God. I mean, you'd have to be blind to read the story of Joseph and think that there's clearly a hand behind the scenes that's working all of this stuff out, that's making things happen, giving Joseph favor. And you get into that in 39, where we'll go this next week. But I mean, that's the thing, is you're seeing Joseph, all Joseph can do is just do the next right thing, to just take the step that's in front of him and then let God deal with the rest. And I think that's what anyone can do. When we all find ourselves in situations where we make choices we wish we wouldn't have made, we did stuff. I can't repair my past. Like, I can't fix everything that I did, all the stuff that I've done, but I can make the choices that I can make right now, and then let God bring healing where God is bringing healing. So it's both an act and a trust, I would say, is to let that in God's hands, but do what you can do. It's a huge theme in the Joseph story, is this sort of tension between what I talked about a couple of weeks ago, resignation and obsession. The obsession being our desire to control everything. And sometimes we try to do that through spiritual ways and means, through prayer or whatever, but we want to be in control of everything. The other, and so worry is a side effect of that. Like, worry is the obsession with what could be, or let's say even what would be worry, and like thinking about the past. Regret. That's it.
Oh,
so regret is like obsession over your past.
Anxiety is obsession over the future.
Yeah. So anxiety. There you go. So anxiety is sort of obsession over the future, and regret is obsession over the past. And I think neither one of those. Like, what can I do about either? And so why should I spend my time obsessing over things that I cannot control? I think Jesus kind of makes that pretty clear in Matthew 6. The flip side of that is resignation, fatalism, hedonism, which essentially says nothing I do matters. And you can kind of view this through a secular or non-secular lens. Secular lens would be, we're all just here by accident. Non-secular or religious lens would be God's in control of everything, and so c'est la vie. He's going to do what he's going to do. I don't have to try. God will do what God will do, and the Bible is not in either position, biblically speaking. And you see this in Joseph's life. There's both Joseph's part and there's God's part, and God, and I mean, it's right there from the very beginning. You have God creating, but then you have God inviting man into this partnership. So. That theme does not end through Scripture all the way through. It's always that. God and man together. God and man together. Genesis to Revelation. God and man together. I mean, that's, Revelation says, behold, the dwelling place of God is with men. That's exactly what's going to happen. God and man together. So that idea is present in the story of Joseph. You have God working behind the scenes, but you have Joseph doing what he can do in the place that he gets sent, and in the situations that he's placed in. And I think it's a perfect picture of what we're to do when we find ourselves in, because we all find ourselves in situations outside of our control. There's God and there's me. What can I do? Leave God's part to God and sleep well.
Yeah, that kind of makes me think of sometimes we would ask the question, why should I have to do something about something that was done to me?
Oh, wow.
And so this idea of Joseph being he could go into this victim kind of mentality, but he doesn't seem to do that. And we'll talk about that in weeks to come.
So help me understand what you're saying there. Why should I have to do something about something that was done to me? What do you mean?
Yeah.
So I get the concept. Someone hurt me, but basically, are you saying they should be the one to apologize, or they should be the one? I'm not going to deal with this until.
Yeah. Like, I'm fine. Everything is fine. I don't need to forgive them. But they can take care of themselves. And what they did, I'm not going to allow what they did to affect me anymore.
Fascinating. But I can think of nothing, maybe not nothing, but few things less Christ-like than that. I mean, so if God took the same approach, why should I bother with their problem? They did this to me. I'll wait for them to make it right. I mean, is that so I call myself a follower of Jesus. I just don't see how those two things go hand in hand. As Jesus is on the cross, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do.
Yeah.
I don't get, I mean, I'm not trying to ridicule, maybe I am ridiculing the question, but I think we just don't think about how sometimes our thoughts are so antithetical to the way of Jesus. We just don't even realize, culturally speaking, or maybe, what's the right word? Like the way that, it doesn't make any sense from a Christ-like perspective.
Yeah. But sometimes we take these common cultural norms and we collude them with Christendom.
And they're also handy because it requires me to do nothing. I mean, that's I would say beware of any philosophy that requires you to do nothing, that just allows you to sit back and do nothing.
Yeah.
Well, things that are going on in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, beware of anything like that.
Yeah. I mean, Jesus will make you deeply uncomfortable,
Sure.
but you'll be better for it.
Sure,
For
for sure, yeah.
So... let's say somebody was sitting in the Saturday night service with me or any other service during this weekend, and they're hearing you talk or they're listening to this podcast.
Sure.
And it's kind of stirred up some things for them. And they're just wondering, like, if it's overwhelming, where do I start?
Right.
What do I do next?
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think the family excavation tool that we handed out is really helpful because it's at least the beginnings of just asking yourself some difficult questions. I say difficult, just some honest questions about family, and sort of assigning. It's interesting how putting words to things. It's one of the things I think is so helpful about this is that words bring form to that which is formless. And as long as things remain unspoken, I think when they're not named, it's harder to really identify what's going on. There's something powerful about going, that was fear. I remember, I don't want to get into the specifics of it because for me it's a too private of a story for me, but I remember a moment in my life in the last 6 years where I had to name some stuff that was going on the inside of me. And by identifying what it was, it helped me learn how to deal with it differently when those situations came up again. I could respond in a different way. I could recognize that what I was feeling was fear, and I needed to. I was going to have to press past that, but again, sort of liberating in some sense to say, I don't want to be afraid anymore. And I didn't realize I had been living with fear for a while, but naming it was really important for me. And so I think just even the simple step of going through the family excavation tool, and obviously that's linked in the show notes. If you didn't get it this weekend, you can download it there. But yeah, just spending a little bit of time kind of going through that. And I think some realizations will come up. And generally I think this happens best probably in some form of a conversation. So it may be a little bit of like one-on-one work, you working with the excavation tool, and then sitting down with someone and saying, this is what I saw, this is what I wrote down for my dad and my mom, and oh my, these patterns started to emerge. And I'm just a big believer in starting where you know to start and then letting God kind of do what he can do from there. Like let next steps emerge from there. Potentially that's counseling. Potentially that's sitting down with a pastor. Potentially that gets worked out in a small group. Potentially that's a conversation that you need to have with a parent. Potentially that's stuff that won't get worked out until a decade from now, right? I mean, that can happen. These family journeys, I would just say, give yourself like some grace because it's not all going to happen at once. Joseph's story happened over time. And it's not like, okay, here's a quick tool. And we're going to fix your family in a weekend.
Yeah.
Often it's going to take some time, but at least there's a starting point where you can start kind of acknowledging and recognizing some things, and then make those matters of prayer and counsel and see what God does and lead you, or he leads you from there.
That's amazing. Yeah. Good advice.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
I do say so myself,